I'm going to launch right into it and just kind of get the session going. So let me just pull, I got a presentation here and we'll pull this up. And just to follow on from Sean's note, I'll do a quick intro and then we'll set up a little bit about how the session is going to work. Most important, I really want to make this as interactive as possible. So if you're in Zoom, you'll see a little Q&A box. Feel free to ask questions through that. I'll also keep my eye on the chat window as well. Real brief introduction for me. So my name is Ashman. I'm currently the founder of Bothered Mind Advisors. And so I spend most of my days helping founders find the path to profitable, scalable growth. So whether they're a funded company that's got stuck between rounds or they're very early stage and trying to figure out how to bootstrap their way to some level of scale. That's what I do day to day. My background, I spent 12 years building venture-backed companies. So I was the CFO of the Huffington Post up until we sold it to AOL back in 2011. And then went on to spend 8 years building what ultimately became Group 9 Media, which is one of the largest digital media companies in the world. And today, aside from Bothered Mind, I'm a mentor at E4All and Roxbury. I spend a lot of time at Venture Cafe with Sean and the team. I've also in the past been an advisor to Lair Hippo Ventures, which is a large seed stage fund in New York. So suffice to say, I've spent a lot of time around startups, and the topic around building profitable scale is really important to me. And we'll get into a little bit why, and most important, how that applies to this particular moment in time. So just some ground rules here to think about. There we go. Definitely ask questions. I've left enough time for me to make sure that I can address any specific questions that you have. If we have technical difficulties, we're all coming in from home or from remote offices, myself included. If something freezes up, don't panic. We'll all get back in and keep going. There will be a survey that's posted up, so please complete the survey. It's super simple. It's really fast. And if at some point you have to leave or at the end of the session, if you have questions, just wanted to say up front, my email is eric@botheredmind.com. Don't hesitate to reach out as a follow-up. Okay, so I give this session, typically this session is called Pivot to Profitability. It's a framework that I use in a lot of my day-to-day work. And the framing for that is that profitability puts you in the control of your own destiny. And so in this age where it's very common for startups to be focused on high growth, high cash burn, trying to drive valuation, get to the next fundraise, I think we've seen a lot over certainly the last year, some of the negative side effects of that. And the reality is that even in the best of times, which is not where we are right now, almost 70% of all funded startups ultimately either have to become self-sustaining or they run out of cash. And so, the dream of the big exit and the high value exit, it doesn't apply to most companies. Most companies never get to an M&A or an IPO. Even if they hit that first seed stage of funding. And the reality is the more that you understand the metrics that drive your business, and the more that you've always got that path to profitable growth, the more in control you are. That means better terms in your fundraising, better partners, better board, better people all around your company. So I teach this day to day. I think in this particular moment in time where, what's happening in the market, what's happening with respect to coronavirus, what's happening and what will continue to happen in the economy, and there's with all of the uncertainty going on, the question becomes do you have enough of a handle on the fundamentals of your business to respond fast enough when the earth shifts beneath your feet? And certainly I've been building companies now for quite a number of years. So I was around in the dot-com bust of 2000, 2001. I was at HuffPo in 2008, 2009, when that collapse happened as well. This is something like we've never seen before, but in every one of those instances, the question comes back to some fundamental questions. What's your burn rate and what's your runway? How much cash do you have and how long is that going to last? How are my investors going to react in terms of where my business is going and what my outlook looks like? And also, and I want to make sure we touch on this as well, is in what new business models what might my new business models look like? So we're in a moment where there's shifts that are going to have negative impacts on a lot of companies, but there's also going to be this massive disruption and change in consumer behavior. as we're experiencing right now. And so that's certainly going to to create some opportunities that we need to be aware of, and that we'll talk a little bit about in this session. And so I want to break this down in a couple of pieces, and I'm going to start with, so there's a general framework that I use in this conversation, which is assess, action, advise, and self-care. And I want to start with the assessment phase, and whether you have built this or need to build it quickly to make some important decisions right now. Going through these steps is really important. This is a moment in time where you need to be decisive, but you can't panic. And when you've got this much uncertainty as to what not just next week looks like, but 2 months looks like, what the next year might look like, you definitely can do more harm than good if you don't understand the key drivers of your business. So I want to give you a little bit of a framework for what I use all the time in terms of decision making, in particular in moments and times like this. And so when I work through this process, I kind of break it down into 3 pieces. There's defining your KPIs. There's tying your KPIs to a financial model that gives you a cash forecast. And that's where we're going to understand what our runway looks like. And then we're going to tie it to this concept of innovation accounting, which is a concept out of lean startup that we'll talk about for a few minutes. And so let's start with the concept of KPIs. And there's all kinds of KPIs that we could talk about. You can measure inventory health, and you can measure engagement with your software or with your systems, or all kinds of user engagement stats. But I want to focus on sales-focused KPIs. And I tend to break them down into customer behavior, which is things like retention rate, churn rate, repeat purchase rate, customer growth, so conversion rates, customer acquisition costs, customer lifetime value, the concept of unit economics, and then financial metrics as well. So whether it's average order value, gross profit, and return rate. And we're going to focus on those because obviously we're trying to get at, and for every company, these are going to be a little bit different, but this gets to the fundamental. What are the key drivers of sales, net sales, and ultimately gross profit? And so you need to understand those for your business all the way across each aspect of your sales funnel. And a lot of folks get scared by this concept. And the way I would think about it is if the concept of KPIs is a little bit scary, then think about it as customer journey. And start thinking about the customer journey as you acquire them into your sales funnel, as you start to pull them down that funnel and what the behaviors look like. And you're trying to get to the levers that convert them into a customer and start to drive real revenue for you. What's most important about KPIs, aside from measuring the right things, is that they're actionable, accessible, and auditable. And again, in this moment in time where the companies that I'm advising right now are trying to make decisions in the window of a week that can have massive ramifications for the company for the next 2 months to a year. You need to be able to pick KPIs that you can action off of. So when can you make changes that have an impact on the results of these KPIs? Right now, it's most important that they're accessible. Can you report on them? I meet companies all the time that they've defined their KPIs, but they can't get at them, or they can run them once a month. There's no frequency to their being able to generate the kind of information that they need, and they have to be auditable. So you have to understand how the data and the results are generated. You've got to have somebody, either you or somebody in your team, that can follow it all the way through, because you need to make sure that they're right, and people need to be able to trust them. So before you start making really big decisions that can dramatically change the shape and the trajectory of your company right now, given all that's going on externally, you kind of need to understand what your key drivers of your top line are. This really comes in handy as well when you think about sales funnel. And so right now, with the last couple of weeks, and for a lot of my clients now in companies I'm advising, we've moved past this stage. But we've been using the sales funnel as an early warning system. And so before you even get into what we're seeing now, and just to be really specific, in the last 4 or 5 days is when a lot of companies have really seen the impact and the slowdown in the top line. The week before, you could see that it was coming. And so using your sales funnel in a moment like this to see changes in behavior before it even hits your revenue line is incredibly important. It's particularly important if you have a very long sales cycle. You know, if you are a software SaaS company that sells into the healthcare space, you could end up with a 9 to 12 month sales cycle with 2 months in between every part of the pitch, every meeting. And if you're just sitting back waiting for your revenue line to change, you could be waiting for 6 months. And so this is a moment where you want to start focusing on whether, you know, the top of the funnel, which is things like leads, fewer visitors to your site, less foot traffic in your stores, fewer initial sales calls, fewer inbound RFPs coming in, following declining metrics from your inside sales team. These are the type of things you'll see at the very top of your funnel that you want to be paying attention to. Separately, if you go to the middle of the funnel, fewer paid, this is where your prospects are. So you've got them as leads, now they're prospects, they're warm a little bit, but what you'll see here is stalling tactics, delays, things like whether it's fewer pages per visit on your e-commerce site, higher bounce rates, longer periods between meetings with prospects. So, you know, again, going back to B2B type companies, just delays, stalling tactics, not return phone calls, you know, whatever your typical process is for moving people through to conversion, you'll start to see a slowdown. And a lot of companies saw this probably a week to 10 days ago. This started to really happen. No measurable impact on the financials yet, but you could see that there was something going on that was going to suggest that was going to lead to a downward trend. And then bottom of the funnel, customers, like the conversion rate. So falling conversion rates, declining customer retention, even just lower average order value, lower deal size. So people are committing, but the duration gets shorter. People commit, but the dollar amount is smaller. These are all indications that you could have had and may have had a week to 10 days ago that would give you an indication that change was coming and it was coming really fast. There are longer term metrics like, again, going back to my prior slide, customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, unit economics, that will ultimately be impacted by the shifts that are happening right now, but they can take weeks to play out, weeks or months, and you don't have weeks or months right now. So you got to find these leading indicators and be prepared to react to them. Just to come back to this concept of KPIs, the reason that setting your KPIs is so important is because your whole revenue model and your P&L ultimately, down to gross profit for sure, should be built off of these KPIs. Far too often when I sit down with a company early on and look at their financial model, it's rooted in an arbitrary starting point of X dollars in sales and then an arbitrary growth rate that goes up from there. And you really need to go back to the beginning and understand this is where tying in your cost of customer acquisition, things like average order value, return rate, gross profit margin. If you just know some of these basic KPIs, you can very easily build revenue models for new customers and existing customers for every distribution channel that you have. And if you're not sure of all the data, then at least plug in basic assumptions so that you can start to test into what's true. And so I can't stress enough how important it is. And it comes back to where we are right now and the decisions that you need to make in your companies, how important it is to root your financial model and your forward-looking plans and the key drivers of your business so that as you start to see things shift and change, you can adjust accordingly. And I'm going to talk about how you do that in a minute. I want to extend this concept all the way through to cash flow, because ultimately what's most important for most, I would assume for everybody on this call right now, is what is my cash runway and how many months of cash do I have left and how do I deal with that information? And for most companies, Zoom excluded, because I think Zoom is doing fine right now. For most companies, whatever your cash runway was 3 weeks ago, I would expect that it's dramatically different today. And I think the great challenge for early stage companies now is that how short has that window become and what can they do about it? And so to just put a pin in that point, because cash flow can be a really challenging piece of your financial model to adjust quickly, you just need to understand the disconnects between profitability and cash. And so a great example of that is inventory. If you are an e-commerce brand and you sell apparel is a great example, and you sell apparel, you may have to have committed to buys 9 months or 12 months ago for merchandise that you're putting on sale in April. And that shipment is hitting your warehouse now, which means you either had to go out of pocket 9 months ago when you placed that order, or you put a deposit down and now the shipment's coming in and now your vendor wants payment before they'll release it. And so e-commerce and commerce in general and retail is a really capital intensive business, because you have to kind of go out on a limb, purchase inventory well in advance of when you're going to put it up for sale, just to ensure that it hits your warehouse in time to sell it. And so right now, with offline locations closed all across the country, e-commerce and retail, traditional retailers, are sitting on piles of inventory that they cannot move. Accounts receivable, if you're in the advertising business, dealing with agencies, agencies are notoriously slow payers. And if everybody right now is conserving cash and pulling back and slow rolling spend faster, pulling back on spend, that can be another example of where your P&L doesn't show the full extent of the challenges that you have from a cash flow perspective. So you just need to connect this all the way through. And right now we're in a moment where, again, whatever your runway was 3 weeks ago, it's very different today. And things like inventory, receivables, capital expenditures, even debt repayment, and banks tightening up their capital requirements can make this a really challenging part of the puzzle. And again, at any time, if anybody has questions, feel free to use the Q&A box, or just hit the chat, and feel free to put something into the chat box, and I'm happy to jump in and try to answer questions as I go. So don't feel like you have to wait for me to stop. I'm gonna keep on running through, but please don't hesitate to ask questions if you have them. Okay, so all of this becomes important because ultimately, if you go back to what a startup really is, and this is going to be a particularly important point, again, for where we are right now in terms of the impact of coronavirus, and the impact on the economy that we're going to see. Startups are really, they're not companies yet. They're laboratories. You start with a hypothesis. You've got a hypothesis around a product opportunity, a market opportunity, a customer segment to go after, a pricing strategy, and a profit strategy. And you then have to go into the market and test it. And we all know most of our assumptions at the beginning are wrong. And so the lean startup framework, which is what this innovation accounting model comes from, is really built around the concept of you need to get from the ideas phase to the build phase, get your MVP out there, get the product in the marketplace. And this is where you start measuring the performance of your KPIs against your initial assumptions that drove your initial business model. So you had KPIs that said you were going to be this profitable and grow this fast, and it would generate this kind of cash. And then you put it in the marketplace. Most of those assumptions are wrong, and you start to tweak and tune, with your goal being of getting through this feedback loop fast enough to find product market fit, a path to scalable, profitable product market fit before you run out of cash. That's the whole goal of a startup. And so understanding how that connects through and getting through that cycle, and this concept of pivoting or persevering, either feeling like you've got the KPIs in place in line and that you can drive the type of business model that takes the company forward, or making the small adjustments. Pivots are not changing your business model. They're small movements around customer segmentation, go-to-market strategy, so on, across your different parts of your business. The changes that you will make to try to find product market fit and scale and grow. Now, in the best of times, what I advise people is that you should be able to get through this cycle every couple of weeks when you're just getting going. And even a mature company should be constantly moving through the cycle and testing what's actually happening against their key drivers of their business versus the assumptions that they have. Well, now we're in a cycle where the KPIs are changing every day. So if you have a company and you are in market with a product, whatever you should be seeing, I would expect that for most of us, we are seeing KPIs shift to the downside every single day. Customer behavior is going to get incredibly erratic. And so that measurement cycle becomes really important because you need to figure out what's happening. And then you need to figure out how to respond. And so every time the KPIs shift, it has an impact on your business model. These are the things that are going to pull back on your runway. So conversion rate dropping, traffic at the top of the funnel coming down, so customer acquisition costs ballooning. All of these things are going to happen really quickly right now. And you need to be able to see that and tie it back and figure out what adjustments you're going to make. This is also an opportunity. And so this theme will come back a couple of times throughout the course of this conversation. This is also where you might spot new directions to go, new business models. So this is not just going to create a massive pullback, it's creating a massive disruption in consumer behavior. And this is a moment where at the same time that everything is crashing down around a lot of companies, you might find opportunities to flick out small experiments that lean into small different pockets of engagement that you never would have expected to see before. And the same feedback loop can be used. And I think many startups will find that in the next couple of months, they can use this approach to find new opportunities and build into new markets, even as old parts of their business collapse, whether for a few months or permanently. And so I'll leave it there, but this is how you have to connect all of these pieces together. And ultimately it's a rinse and repeat over and over again. This is a thing that most great companies never stop doing. Right now, it's something that like all startups should be doing on a regular basis and really, really quickly. Right now, you need to be able to accelerate this cycle. So a word of warning as you go through this exercise. And again, particularly now where I would argue that every move that you make has a higher stakes and higher sense of urgency, particularly if you're a company that just has reassessed their cash runway and you've got 18 to 24 months of cash, you're great. And that's a terrific place to be. If your 12 months of runway just became 6, every move you make has obviously a heightened level of stakes for you to think about. And so the warning I'll give you is be very careful of vanity metrics. In the best of times, I think vanity metrics can genuinely kill a company. Certainly right now, if you're focused on metrics like downloads, registered accounts, social media followers, page views, the things that in a noisy environment might actually go up and to the right, but don't drive your business and don't actually connect back to revenue, you're going to make some really terrible mistakes. So be really careful of vanity metrics. Again, in good times, you find them littered in pitch decks because they impress venture capitalists and they can drive valuation. You cannot make decisions right now on what you should be changing within your company based upon things like gross revenue and downloads that don't connect back to your cash flow and P&L. Okay, so that's an assessment framework. And I moved through that pretty quickly. It's a lot of information, but as you're making decisions, even if you don't have that framework built, you have to find a way to just understand enough about what the key levers of your business are to figure out what decisions you're going to make right now to give you more time to respond over the course of the next year or even the next few months. And so I want to talk a little bit about how to think about taking action. So as you think about taking action, and particularly for companies where, again, going back to you had 18 months of runway and now it's 12, you had 12 months of runway and now it's 6. Let me give you some thoughts around how to work through this a little bit. It is for almost all of us, and again, it's amazing that we're on Zoom. Zoom is powering the world right now. There are definitely companies that are going to benefit from the dislocation that's going to happen. That's happening right now. But for most of us, this is a moment in time where you've got to be really decisive, or you're gonna be too slow and too late. And so you've got to be doing things like assessing the downside risk. You've got to take that KPI model, your financial model, your cash flow model, even if it's really rough and just your best stab at it, and start to figure out what various scenarios could happen. What are the most conservative scenarios that you can consider, and how short does that make your timeline? And so, right now I've got clients that are assuming that all retail stores are going to be closed through the end of June, and their online experience is going to be down by 50% for a couple of months. that's a moderately conservative scenario, because the outside scenario is maybe everything's closed till July, and you can go to a scenario where everything's dislocated to the end of the year. So I think you've got to start scenario planning and thinking about how you protect yourself on downside risk. Focus on distribution channels. So if you're a B2B SaaS company, you might have an online channel with a freemium play, and then you might have a direct sales force for big direct sales channels for bigger clients. These different distribution channels might all behave very differently over the next few months. And some of them might have long sales cycles that you can't afford to maintain right now. And others might actually pop and do better than they've ever done before, because everybody's online and behaving in a different way. So break this down by distribution channel. You're focusing on extending your cash flow. So rule number one is that the key to a moment like this is stay alive, keep your company alive. And that can be pulling back on things that will drive future growth. I think a lot of companies right now are going to be pulling back on work that's being invested for Q3, Q4 growth, for 2021 growth, pulling down whole new distribution channels, some of these things that have just been spun up. Your first most important thing is keep the company alive. If you have a debt facility in place, spend time with your bank. Find out what opportunities there might be. Either if you have a term loan, maybe draw it all down and get that cash in your bank account. If you know that you're going to breach covenants, plan for it and get ready for that conversation with your bank rather than surprising them a couple of months down the road. So manage your debt facilities pretty aggressively. And lastly, look, the federal government's been pretty slow, and the state governments too have been kind of catching up and trying to react to this. There's certainly some new programs that are going to be launching in the next 3 or 4 weeks, whether it's new SBA loans or corporate relief and small business relief. You're going to have, it's really hard, it's really confusing, but pay attention to new government programs that are launching. And I can't reinforce this enough. Look for new opportunities. Ultimately, you're already seeing this in the unemployment numbers. There's some really hard decisions to be made. And so as you think about the next few weeks and what you need to do to protect your company, extend that runway, that is ultimately likely for many, many companies to entail letting people go, discontinuing significant strategic initiatives, making some really hard decisions. This part of the presentation doesn't change regardless of good times or bad times, but it's particularly relevant now. To the extent that you or people you know are holding off on making those decisions right now, the number one reason that I find that founders hold back and are too slow to make difficult decisions is because they don't want to let people down. They don't want to admit that things are going badly. They don't want to sit in front of their board and tell them that there are problems. And they certainly don't want to sit in front of their employees or stand in front of their employees and let them know that there are layoffs coming, that initiatives are going to be shut down, and that the company has a problem and is on the wrong path. So the emotional, and this gets into the conversation around self-care, the emotional burden that founders are carrying right now is extraordinary. It's a really difficult moment in time. Some people on this call, I'm sure it feels like an existential threat to their company. And for others, it's just going to mean some really difficult days and difficult conversations. So there's just one of the questions that just popped up, just reflecting on the fact that Asia clients were offline for 6 to 8 weeks. This is specific to the financial services space. The question is, when do I think North American professionals will be able to return to a normal sense of work? I don't know. I don't think any of us know yet. I've had conversations today where my best case projection is I'm telling clients to prepare for at least 2 months of disruption, with a possibility that it goes longer. I don't think we know yet, but I think we could say that what I will say is that a lot of people right now are looking at what's happening in China, where they've bent the curve and they've dramatically reduced the number of the new identification of the spread of the virus over the last couple of days. And all I'll say is our response looks like nothing like theirs. So I think we have quite a ways to go. But I think this is where this is where I think that right now on this topic of taking action, you've got to be incredibly conservative and start really thinking about worst case scenarios. You've got to make decisions, and you might find a way to step into those decisions. So maybe you have to make a series of hard decisions right now, and then you have 3 or 4 weeks to go a little further out and give yourself a chance to step a little further out so we can figure out what's going on. But now is the time, if you have less than a year of cash runway, in your conservative scenario, not based upon the business plan you had before, but if you look at what's happening in your business right now, and you have less than a year of cash, you should be making dramatic changes to your company and pulling back on expenses to give you more time. So you got to get aggressive with this because we don't know. And it is possible that this is a dislocation, not just in terms of us being able to go back to work, but that the macroeconomic impact stifles consumer or even business investment for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. So I want to talk about the process for reducing costs quickly. And so I'm going to take you step by step how I think about this and how I advise people to think about this. Rule number 1, I do not believe that it is effective to cut expenses across the board and take a broad-based approach to let's just reduce costs everywhere. The key to effectively reducing spend rate is to stop doing very specific pillars of work. And so you can't get into the death by 1,000 cuts. You can't expect everybody to do all of the things with 20% less resource and somehow think that's going to save you. You need to find the stop doing items. And those are the things that you have to burn those pillars down. And then you have to deal with the impact of that, which is often employee layoffs, and certainly is reduced expense and investment in areas of the business that you don't think you can invest in right now. And when I talk about this, what I'm referring to, and again, you're going to see that this is true all the time. This is going to be particularly true right now. Inefficient marketing spend. So I'm advising companies right now that if you have a big performance marketing group that has been spending a lot online for customer acquisition, cut that level of spend by 40, 50, 60, 70% right now. Keep that powder dry. Now that's difficult because it means it's going to slow your rate of growth down even further, but these channels are incredibly inefficient right now. And so even in the best of times, when you're burning too much cash, often it's because you've gone from a really tight core group of super efficient customers. And then as you scale your spend, every cohort gets a little bit less efficient. And somehow you're trying to make that unit economics math work. And this is where you get high growth, high cash burn businesses, which is the direct to consumer space for the last 5 years. You're going to see it accelerates now. It's already happening. It's already happened. In the last week and a half, almost all of the performance marketing spend is operating in a far more inefficient way than it was even just 2 or 3 weeks ago. So first things first, keep your powder dry, look for those inefficient marketing spend. You got to pull it back really fast. Because right now you are spending into cohorts that either will not convert or they won't come back, or they're not going to convert at a high enough rate to drive the type of margin that you need right now. And you can't, like we're even looking at it in terms of like with a lot of clients, you'll see the lifetime value that they're thinking about is a 1 to 2 year curve, right? So my unit economics math is I want a payback period of 1 year, 18 months, 24 months. Well, you might want to pull that back to 3 months or 6 months right now, because you can't be you won't be around, you might not be around in a year to wait for that payback period to come back. So marketing, first thing, be really, really focused on that right now. In other areas like unprofitable sales channels, again, if you're burning a lot of cash and your runway is really short, you might not be able to have that B2B direct sales team that has a 1 year sales cycle out there trying to do deals. First of all, you can't meet anybody. And second of all, the sales cycle is too long. So look for the sales channels that are actually going to drive revenue now. And you need to be very wary of the sales channels that have long sales cycles, high cost structure, and are burning cash over the next few months. Unprofitable products, unproductive initiatives, a lot of, from the products perspective, companies inherently start with a few great products and then they start to scale, and many of those other products, they're meh in the best of times. And right now they're just a cash drain. So pull back to the core of what your customer really wants. Same thing with unproductive initiatives. You know, the way I talk about it is, when you hire people, people like to do things and they like to create things. So even in a company of 10 to 20 people, it's amazing how many initiatives are up and running that you don't even know about. And so pay attention to that. There's a lot of like things spin up that you don't really know are happening. You need to deal with those and pull them back down right now. You need to move fast. The clock's working against you. And again, even in the best of times, as soon as you start the process of determining what projects to pull back on and what initiatives to stop, a word will get out within the organization. Particularly right now, all employees know if their companies are in trouble. People see it, people know what's happening. So you're always up against the clock to move quickly, to move past whatever difficult decisions you have to make and pull fear back out of the company before it kind of consumes and everything that's going on. So this is a process that you need to be decisive about. And so let me tell you, I'm going to give you 3 quick rubrics that I use that can slow quick decision-making down. And this is stuff that again, in a normal planning process, you might have a couple of weeks to think through. Right now, you might have a few days. And so the first is the sunk cost fallacy. So I equate this to I always use the all-you-can-eat buffet as an example of the sunk cost fallacy, which is you pay $35 for an all-you-can-eat buffet. You load up your plate. Halfway through the first plate, you're full. And you decide that you have to plow on because you paid your $35 and you want to get your money's worth. And so you proceed to eat 3 plates worth of food, which puts you on the couch for the next 3 days. The sunk cost fallacy is based on the idea that you just spent all of this time and all of this money on this thing that you thought was going to be incredibly valuable and important. And somehow that should influence the way you think about what to do next. And it's a trap. The only thing that matters, particularly right now, when you need to be bringing your cash burn down fast, is the impact it's going to have in the future. And particularly right now, for a lot of companies, is it going to have a positive impact on my company in the next 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months? Because you can't afford to invest in things that have long payback periods. So you cannot think about all that went into it. The only thing that matters is what it's going to produce and what impact it's going to have on your business right now. The 20-60-20 rule. 20% of the things that are going on in your company right now are amazing. They're clear winners. They drive profitability. They drive scalable growth. They're right on point in terms of company mission. Clear winners, no dispute. 20% are clear losers. If you look across your company, you could put everybody in a room and very quickly tick these things off and say, stop doing that, stop doing that, stop doing that. Easy. It's the 60% in the middle that's hard. And this right now is the stuff you have to be able to root out. It's all the meh. It's fine. It's okay. Like customer acquisition costs, it's not great. It's not terrible. Gross profit, it's not great. It's not terrible. Like we could scale this. I think we could get there if we just keep working at it. These are the things that are really hard. And as you make the really difficult decisions, in good times, some of this stuff might stay because they're investment areas. Right now, they can't. And so you're really there to root out the 60% and pull down the things that you need to pull down that are not adding enough value. They're not losers. They even could have potential. And if you put them in a room and then have all the key stakeholders talk about them, they will all make an impassioned plea as to why they're important. You as the CEO, you as the founder, need to give people permission to move through these things and make really hard decisions around them. And lastly, and this is particularly true right now, is avoid analysis paralysis. This goes all the way back to my KPI framework that I talked about earlier. You may not have that. All you might have is your best guess at a P&L, best guess at cash flow, best guess at cash runway, and a little bit of actual data that gives you clarity that something terrible is happening within the company. And that might be all you have. And you as the CEO and you as the founder need to push your team through this and set a goal of reaching really hard decisions, even with imperfect data. And I will say that this connects to the 20-60-20 rule, and that there are people that will fight for the projects that they care about. And one of the best ways to stall a tough decision is to ask for more data. So this is a tell. If you didn't have it for the last 2 years you've been building your company, the idea that you're going to magically develop it now in the next week or in the next few days, probably not. And so be aware of this. It's a great stalling technique. You'll get managers and directors and VPs saying, why don't we run it this way? And like, can we look at the data this way? And it's a stalling technique. So you need to be this ultimately comes down to the CEO to make the decision and push the team through with the data that you have to get the hard decisions. So be careful of this one. It's a real trap. And it's especially true right now when we don't have the time. After you make all of those difficult decisions, whatever choices you make, you have to go all the way back and reset your assessment framework. Your business is going to be smaller. It's going to be different. You're focusing on different channels or whatever it's going to be. Just make sure that your assessment framework is up to date. And I think this is really important right now. Take care of your people. This is super stressful. We're all sitting in our houses. We're all remote. It's one thing when you're the founder and the CEO and you're the driver of these decisions, and it's difficult enough in that situation. But for employees waiting for information right now, it's really, really difficult. Don't run your company to zero. You need to do something. You have to do right by people for severance. You need to take care of people for healthcare right now. You need to spend a little bit of money to make sure that you treat people right. It's not just about the people that go, but it says a lot about the people that stay, about the company's values and what the company really cares about and represents. So please, in this particular moment in time, give yourself the room to do right by the people on your team that have been working with you for so long. And again, please keep throwing any questions that you have. I'm gonna keep going. We have about 15 minutes left. So I want to talk briefly about impact on fundraising strategy. Because, and again, this is something I say in normal times. I was saying this 3 weeks ago in this presentation, which is when you pull back, when you're burning a lot of cash and then you pull back and you slow down growth rates, it absolutely creates a detour in your fundraising strategy. So if you raised a seed round, if you raised an A round and you were growing at 40 or 50% year over year, you start burning too much cash, you're not going to get to your B, and so you have to pull back and slow down your growth rate. It's absolutely going to have an impact on your fundraising strategy. And whether you can ever get back on that fundraising train really will, maybe you'll never be able to pull it off. It'll kind of depend on whether you can get that growth rate going again. But it absolutely creates a detour in the best of times. Because VCs are very much focused on year over year hypergrowth. So a 1 year stall, even though it's the one thing you had to do to save the company, for them, it just takes all the interest away. And so it's really difficult to get back on that train. And it's just worth knowing that, but sometimes it's the right decision because it's the only way to save your company. It's particularly true right now. We're in an environment where most funds still have plenty of cash to deploy. They are currently triaging their portfolio. So they're making very hard decisions about what companies in their portfolio might be worth saving if they need to deploy reserves. And I'm getting notes from partners and different funds looking for information, because partner meetings this Monday will be fund partners sitting around a table and starting to triage their portfolio. And so if you have raised and you have a VC backed board, one of the questions you need to start thinking about is whether they're going to be there for you or not if you need a little bit of extra help. And most funds aren't prepared to help all the companies in their portfolio. So there are decisions to be made there. On the other side, it's a pretty difficult time to be raising. If you only had 6 months of runway, but you thought you were going to be fine because you were raising right now, you need to go through all the steps we just talked about and give yourself more time. There are absolutely going to be industries that do well in this environment, and there will be industries that get funded. But it's worth noting that this is a really uncertain time, and you need to keep that in mind, that if you've got investors, they may not be there for you. They're going to definitely pick their positions and where they push in additional cash. For a lot of companies, the VCs won't be there. And so just keep that in mind. And it's always a good discussion to have with your investors. They're not necessarily going to tell you. Most investors will tell you that you should cut really hard and figure it out on your own. And then quietly they will decide who they swoop in at the last minute and save when push comes to shove. So don't count on outside help in a moment like this. It doesn't often come. I'm going to move through the advise section. The one thing I say, so advise is all about communication and how you communicate difficult decisions and changes like we've talked about to your investors, your board, and your team. I think this is just as true now as it ever has been, which goes all the way back to this idea of, and when you build a company for the right reasons, when you have a mission that you care about, when you have a clear path to profitable, scalable growth, you will surround yourself with great investors, great people, great board members, all aligned with this idea of building a truly great company. If you're, and I meet people like this all the time where, you know, I'll say like, what's your goal for your company? And the stated goal is to find a path to exit and make a pile of money. You will surround yourself with people that's all they really care about. And when the chips are down and it's really difficult and you have to make really hard decisions, they'll behave that way and they'll let you go and they'll abandon you because you can't fulfill the one promise that they cared about, which was to make cash. So if you partner with mercenaries, they will act like it. And I think that people are going to find that to be particularly true right now. Somebody just asked the question, if I'm talking about a company with 10 people in it or 50, I think this is a company of 10 people, a company of 50, it's a company of 500, it's a company of 1,000. There's nobody immune to what's happening right now. And so you can be the earliest stage startup. You could be, you just got your first product in the market last year. You've been self-funding and you thought you had 7 months to go, and you don't anymore. And in the same way that you're seeing some of the largest companies in the world right now start to let people go because they have to. So that's just one thing to think about. So that you're seeing, I think companies of all sizes ultimately are going through the process of what's my cash runway? How do I preserve cash right now? And what do I have to do? So I want to talk a little bit about, I want to end on the concept of self-care. And again, I'll keep answering questions if anybody has any, but I do want to touch a little bit on founder mental health. Because I think that the next week, month, several months, we'll see how long this lasts, are going to be incredibly difficult. And so I think it's worth just spending a couple of minutes talking about this. First of all, like this is not your fault. I was on the call with a founder yesterday that just spent the last year wrenching their company through a really difficult pivot, made some really hard decisions, and on the back of that had the best Q1 they've had in years, and everything pointing in the right direction, only to get kicked in the gut last week based on the impact that this is having on their company, and having to go through the entire cycle all over again now. It's a really difficult time. We should all recognize that this is going to create a massive amount of mental stress for founders everywhere. And we need to build networks of people that we care about and kind of support each other, hopefully through sessions like this and the work of Venture Cafe, even over our laptops and from our homes, be there for each other, because this is really hard. And this is fairly unprecedented. This is genuinely unprecedented. The rate of slowdown that we will see, not just what we've seen, but what we will see, it's going to be heartbreaking. It's going to be really difficult. And a lot of what's about to happen does not reflect on any founder in terms of their ability to start or build a business. These are pretty extraordinary circumstances, which connects nicely to this next concept, which is, so make time for the things that are most important. I know I don't mean it. Hopefully that doesn't come off as overly simplistic or trite. I think this is really key. And I think we're finally starting to have discussions around the importance of just the basic hierarchy of needs and the things that people need to do to take care of themselves. So this whole work all night, no sleep, grind it out mentality, which I think has done a tremendous amount of damage over the last 10 to 15 years to entrepreneurs everywhere, particularly important right now. So when you're getting down and when you're trying to work through this, get back to the basics, because it's just really important to leave space for all the things that are most important. I just want to say, and don't believe the hype. The startup press is the worst. And so my example of this is going back to 2013 when I was building a company called Thrillist that also owned a company called Jack Threads, which was a men's e-commerce brand. And we were scrapping our way through building the company, and this company Fab came out of nowhere, raised $150 million, hit $1 billion valuation. And the CEO had this quote of, they went from 0 to hero in 9 months. And then it was hard, just like looking at us as a team, wondering what we were doing wrong, facing a board that didn't think we were doing good enough. And 2 years later, the company was sold for $5 million for parts and scraps. There's just a lot of garbage in the tech startup world. I think it's a little better than it used to be, but you're going to hear these stories of the heroes of the next 3 months that are built on PR, press, and fluff. Focus on your company, focus on the fundamentals, focus on your team. Be really careful of this stuff, particularly the splashy clickbaity stories about these, rose from the ashes in their success despite all that's going on. Most of that stuff isn't true, and it's really good PR, but it's not great for you to focus on. Last thing, this is my last point. So this is my dog, Bowie. Bowie's an awesome dog. She's a rescue dog. We get to take her up to Vermont all the time. She gets to run free. I swear that's her happy face. She's not just about to eat somebody. As much as she gets to do her dog things once in a while, every once in a while, she picks up her head and she just gets to run and she gets to have a great time. This is not Bowie. This is a Bavarian scent hound. And hounds, if you know anything about dogs, are notoriously difficult to train. And they're difficult to train because they get a scent, they put their head down and they follow it. And they don't pick their head back up until they're 4 miles in the middle of nowhere and have no idea how they got there, and often just don't actually know how to get back. And so you often find hounds, you can't take them off leash because they just kind of vanish on you. This is particularly true of founders as well and founding teams. And I'd say it's going to be very true over the next couple of months. You can't just go head down, focus on cash, spreadsheet, KPIs, and try to grit your way out of this. You got to pick up your head a little bit. I think that's particularly true right now because it's not just going to be not all collapse, it's disruption. And with disruption comes opportunity. And I'll end with this because I found these are the stories that people have been telling over the last couple of days. It's worth going back to 2008 and just in 2009. And on the left side, the companies founded during the Great Recession of 2008, and companies on the right were the companies that were founded just before the Great Recession that made it through. As hard as this is, and as hard as the next few months will be, whether you keep this startup that you're working on alive to get to the other side, or whether you spot the next idea, watch for the change. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity coming. We don't know where it is. And through all of that pain, if you're just heads down, you might miss it. And with that, I'll open it up to any other questions that you have. I hope you found this useful and valuable. And I would say if you have follow-up questions, please email me. You can go to pivottofrofitability.com and subscribe. I do a newsletter and we're putting up some video content over the coming weeks. So feel free to follow up with me after this. I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. And so somebody just asked the question, how to capture the opportunity in this critical time. So I'll give you a couple of ways that I think about it. Going back to the innovation accounting framework, you need to pull back and preserve cash, but you can't shut everything down. And what I'm advising clients to do right now is leave a little bit of space for new experimentation. Watch for different behaviors around your sales funnel or different paths to conversion that you weren't really paying attention to before. Now, I will say that this is most obvious an opportunity online right now. So if you are a retailer and you have a retail operation and an e-commerce operation, you're clearly going to see a massive shift in behavior. What you might also see though is that you're not going to get your traditional e-commerce shopper. You're going to get a lot of offline people looking for a slightly different experience. So I see some companies playing with ideas like FaceTime concierge type appointments and these type of concepts around creating an interaction that's virtual, but still engages and creates a level of service that people were used to in the offline world. If you're, again, a B2B SaaS company and you've had an outside sales team that right now can't move product for you, that can't drive new deals and relationships, what's happening online? Do you see people searching for your company and all of a sudden there's a lot more search traffic coming in and they're landing on a particular page? So, and that's like, it's a new funnel that sprouts up because people are still looking for a solution, but they no longer have an external push happening to bring it to their door. So it's really different company to company, B2B to B2C, industry by industry. It does require you ultimately to have your team keep their head up. So part of this is why you have to get quickly through hard decisions because you can't freeze your company right now. You can't just have everybody waiting for the shoe to drop. You got to get them back focused on what's coming next. So get through these hard decisions, but also a little bit of measurement across different parts of your sales funnel so that you can keep an eye on what's going on might help you spot something new that's happening. And that's where burning down what's not working right now, preserving cash, that's the way to get optionality for later. So thanks everybody. We're out of time. Please follow up with me offline if you have any other questions. Otherwise, thanks for taking the time. And I hope you got something valuable out of this. Have a good night.